Good morning, 8th grade. It is Monday. It is chapter 4, section 3. We've been talking about, again, the Wild West and how wild it really was. And the answer is probably more than you even thought. The idea that a group of men were going out looking for gold or riches or herding cattle, as we talked about in section 2, thousands of miles. And there's no formal government. In other words, there's no governor and city council and mayors in any of these towns. And so, like I mentioned the other day, a lot of times they would choose who's the sheriff based on, this person was in the war. This person, Wild Bill Hickok worked as a bounty hunter and a sheriff a lot. He was just famous for being a sharpshooter, which again, not a good way to pick those things. And then at the end of section 2, we talked about the Homestead Act and the Oklahoma Land Rush. And so, as you could, there's if they're going to give land to settlers, you're taking it from Native Americans in most cases. That land doesn't just spring up out of the ground. And so that's what we're going to talk about in section 3 today, the struggles that Native Americans were facing during this time and pretty much through most of American history. So make sure you're writing these down by hand. Make sure you're answering the attendance question in the Google form. I think in 7th grade video, I forgot to ask one the other day, but I'll remember one today. Again, these notebooks will be turned in at the end of the 9 weeks in December. So the Native Americans had coexisted with the buffalo. I mean, listen, when we say this and when the book says this and when I say this and when the notes say this, they coexisted with the buffalo. They got along with the buffalo, lived together in harmony or whatever. That's easy for the humans, the Native Americans, to say. The buffalo still were somewhat getting killed a lot. They relied on buffalo for all their food and all their tools and everything else for hundreds of years. And so the idea of coexisting with the buffalo is not that they would not hunt buffalo. In fact, they were famous for hunting buffalo. But the idea being they didn't kill excess. They used every part of the buffalo that they killed, and they only killed what they needed, and they had an immense respect, almost worshiping in some instances, for the animal, because their entire way of life was based around the existence and the abundance, the plentifulness of these animals, because they would use their hides, they would, of course, use their meat. And so they relied on the buffalo for pretty much everything in their day-to-day life. Not every tribe, but a lot of them. Okay, and so many of them were still nomadic. We talked about all the way back at the beginning of 7th grade the fact that farming ended the idea that tribes had to be nomadic. But some still chose to be. They didn't want to have permanent settlements. They wanted to move around. And, there's still people today that would like to be nomadic, to travel, to never stay in one place for the same amount of time. It's not right or wrong. It's just a choice that people make. And so a lot of these Native Americans out west were following buffalo herds because it was their main source of food. And like I said, they would use every part of the buffalo. But as Americans began to spread further west, the buffalo herds began thinning. I know some of you may have or did play Red Dead Redemption, but the first one, back in, I don't know, over 10 years ago now, Red Dead Redemption 1, that was an achievement you can get. You killed, there's one herd of buffalo and you could kill them. And once they were gone, they were gone. They wouldn't respawn anywhere in the game. And that's a wink and a nod to this, the idea that the white settlers moving west almost did cause the buffalo to go extinct. We watched that America Story of Us video, and it talks about one guy who was a really good shot, and I don't remember the name off the top of my head, who would kill buffalo from a great amount of distance, so far, in fact, that the sound was so quiet because he was so far away that it didn't disturb the rest of the herd, and it would actually he would be able to kill a large chunk of an entire herd just sitting there, and he made more money in 1 year than the president of the United States did at that time, just because he was able to so prodigiously kill so many buffalo. And so, it's hard to tell that guy to stop because he's making so much money, but at the same time, this is a whole basis for a lot of Native American tribes' way of life, and that's disappearing. You could find pictures. I think there was maybe one of the, I don't know, I don't remember, one in the book of just like giant pyramids of buffalo skulls, because they would just kill anyone they came across because they didn't want them getting on their newly built train tracks for obvious reasons. But at the same time, that's not really fair to the Native Americans or to the buffalo. And then of course you wanted to feed the railroad workers. But I mean, tens of thousands. And again, they took buffalo, which is at this time in 2020 a fairly common animal. But before the settlement of the West, they were every bit as common as cows and horses. In fact, in some places, even more so. And they took them all the way to the brink of extinction. They were literally down to just a few dozen buffalo on planet Earth. Now, of course, we have had several species of animals that have gone extinct, but buffalo would have been a big blow because it's such a common animal and such a useful animal to a lot of Native Americans. But buffalo are back. You can get buffalo. You can eat buffalo. You can buy buffalo in most grocery stores. You can order it at some restaurants, not a lot. But there's a guy in Ziegler, I think, that has a buffalo farm. You can buy an entire buffalo. I mean, they turn it into meat first, but you can't just bring a buffalo home like this is Stompy, my new pet. But you get the idea. So we've brought it back now to reasonable numbers, but not in the abundance that it was before. So in 1867, the government creates the Indian Peace Commission because settlers out west are in conflict, fighting, shooty, stabby, stabby, as we like to say here, with the Native Americans for reasons you could pretty much figure out. The Native Americans not only have had this land for thousands of years, but they had had the entirety of North America and South America for thousands of years. And in the late 1400s and the 1500s, the European settlers came in and kept pushing them further and further west. And finally, with the creation of the United States, we've pushed the Native Americans all the way west of the Mississippi River. But then we've told them, specifically in Oklahoma and South Dakota, this is it. We super duper double pinky promise. We're not moving any further into your land. And then, of course, we did. And so now they're pretty much, as you could figure out, upset. Like it says here, the reason that South Dakota specifically and Oklahoma also were the chosen areas for these large-scale reservations because they were land that the white settlers didn't want. They were, the national park in South Dakota where Mount Rushmore is built. It's called literally the Badlands. Because nothing would grow there because it's all cliffs and rocks and stony soil. We talked about in section 2 about the problems with trying to farm in Oklahoma. The sod is too thick. There's tornadoes. There's locusts. And when there's not those things, there's no droughts. There's not trees there to build house. I mean, basically everything, every checkbox that you would have for what would be successful farming, Oklahoma is basically the opposite of that. And so the government gave them the worst land, but then told them we'll give you food and supplies and stuff, and then didn't give them those to begin with. And then eventually, as we talked about already, they took the land from them that they had promised. So Arizona, North and South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, most Native Americans accepted this as just part of the deal because, again, we have been, by this point, centuries of conflict between European or white settlers and Native Americans, and most Native Americans have grown to realize that usually doesn't go well for us whenever there's any sort of fighting. Others refuse to move or abandon the reservations and we're going to live on our own. And so relations with Native Americans are very tense. In the 1860s, we have a lot of, battles, armed clashes, fights, whatever you want to call this. The Sioux warriors led by Red Cloud burned and looted homes in 1862. They attacked on the Bozeman Trail in 66. And again, the newspapers and the government at this time were really going in hard on Native Americans. They were calling them savages and saying they're uncivilized and whatever. But if you look at the whole of American history throughout, even before America was America, like we talked about in 7th grade, it's pretty easy to understand why the Native Americans are so upset about the constant, um, uh, you know, confiscation of their land, breaking of treaties, and everything else. And so, yeah, they're upset, and yeah, they're starting to fight back, but for good reason. They've been kicked off their own property and told that they can't be on here, and then they've been promised to, we'll give you this and that, and they won't, they haven't given you this and that, and so they're upset. And so when settlers are like, well, we're going to give you Oklahoma and South Dakota and all these other areas, and they're like, well, actually, in South Dakota specifically, there's a rumor there was gold in the hills, and so they're like, well, we're taking this back for sure, which is really not how contracts work. You can't give something like, oh, we'll give you South Dakota, and then like, oh, well, we found out now it might be worth something, so we're going to take it back. That's not how things are supposed to work. But anyway, we've gone over this for a year and a half now. The Fetterman Massacre, Crazy Horse, a famous Native American warrior, led off a detachment of American troops as sort of a decoy, and there were his tribe waiting to ambush them, and they basically killed the entire detachment in like half an hour or something. It was one of the most, they use the word massacre for a reason. And so 1868 treaty was supposed to bring peace, but again, settlers hear that there's gold, and so prospectors are swarming the area, and the Native Americans are attacking the prospectors that are coming into their area and trying to take the gold, and then those people are complaining to the government like, hey, the Native Americans are attacking us, which, as you can see here on the first bullet, that's supposed to be their land. You're not supposed to be there to begin with, but that's not how things always work. And so again, as you can see from slide after slide after slide, this is another example of Native American rights not being protected or, even established. And so Little Bighorn was called Custer's Last Stand. General Custer was like, we're going to go attack the Native Americans, but he only had 200 soldiers, and there were thousands of Native Americans. And if you, do the little greater than or less than sign in math, that that's not going to go well for the U.S. Army. And so they attacked, and similar to the Fetterman Massacre, they wiped out all 210, every single one of them in less than half an hour. And so, but this is really, and again, it's easy to say, the Native Americans attacked the Army, but the Army was going there to attack them. And again, this is going on a couple hundred years now of constant conflict. And so the Army eventually puts down the uprising. They send more and more troops until the Native Americans, their spirit is broken and their people have been depleted again. The Dawes Act was eventually passed, and it basically said, they were trying to break up Native American way of life. In other words, you can't have your own tribe. You're just part of America now, and you need to start becoming farmers and all that stuff, which, again, is not how the idea of America is supposed to work. The idea is supposed to be, if you want to be a farmer, you can go do that, and if you want to be whatever religion you want, you can do that, and whatever language, it doesn't matter. That's the whole idea behind America, is freedom to do what you want, and that should extend especially to Native Americans, because literally they were here before anyone else. But we've gone on about this for 2 years now. So they started performing a ritual called the ghost dance. It was basically a dance they would do as a ceremony to hope that the settlers would disappear and the buffalo would come back. But it alarmed and scared the settlers out west, just like the movie Footloose. And they basically told them to stop, and then they didn't. And so then they gathered a wounded knee to mourn the death of Sitting Bull, and the Army went there to confront them and to collect all their weapons, which, again, if you're going to say, if you're going to create a constitution with the Second Amendment allowing people to carry weapons, but then say, but some people can't have weapons, that's not really keeping in spirit with the meaning of the law, especially, again, considering that these are Native Americans that were here first. But anyway, a gunshot went off. Nobody knows who did it, and the Army opened fire and wiped out basically everybody there that was part of the Native American Sioux tribe. And so this is basically the end. This is basically the last straw that broke the spirit of a lot of Native Americans and ended the conflict in the West. Attendance question today is, Halloween, are you dressing up? What are you dressing up as? Are you not dressing up? You know, just let me know what's going on. If you're not, don't have a costume, you can just say that. If you're going to tell me what you're dressed up as, that's fine. If you don't want to tell me, just say, I'm dressing up as Harry Potter, whatever. I don't care. Just as long as you get the idea that the question is the question and then you were paying attention. Stay safe, wear your mask, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye bye.